It started with the sound of the clock. The soft tick, tick, tick that echoed in my apartment like a heartbeat. I lived my life by that rhythm, structured and methodical. Wake up at 7 a.m. sharp. Coffee brewed by 7:15. Breakfast at 7:30, a meticulously portioned bowl of oatmeal with precisely 7 almonds on the side. Everything had its place, from the neatly folded towels in the bathroom to the alphabetically arranged spice rack in the kitchen. Chaos was my enemy. That's not to say I didn't have interests. I worked from home as a data analyst, spending my days sifting through numbers, finding patterns where others saw randomness. I liked that. Patterns made sense. They explained things. They kept the world tidy. When I wasn't working, I read true crime books. The more disturbing, the better. There was something oddly comforting about dissecting the minds of killers, like observing a lion through the bars of a cage. I could study their savagery without ever becoming part of it. At least, that's what I told myself. I'd always been different. People described me as cold or detached. I preferred the term practical. Emotions were inefficient. They clouded judgment, led to mistakes. I didn't make mistakes. That's why the jacket didn't make sense. It was a Saturday morning when I found it. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen and moved on to the bedroom. My bi-weekly ritual, dusting every surface, vacuuming the carpets, and reorganizing the contents of my closet. Everything was supposed to be in its rightful place, but as I slid the hangers aside, I saw it, a navy blue windbreaker I didn't recognize. It was crumpled at the back, half hidden behind my winter coats. I pulled it out, frowning. The fabric felt stiff, almost sticky. When I held it up to the light, my stomach dropped. A dark stain, rusty brown, spread across the left sleeve. My first thought was that it was old coffee or chocolate, something innocuous. But the texture told a different story. Blood. My heart began to pound, a staccato rhythm that didn't match the soothing tick of the clock. I checked the label, hoping it would jog my memory, but there was nothing familiar about it. No brand I recognized. No connection to me. My hands shook as I reached into the pockets. That's when I found the knife. It was small, just a basic folding blade, but the edge was smeared with dried blood. My breath caught as I dropped it onto the bed, recoiling like it had burned me. I stared at it, my mind racing. Why was this in my apartment? Where had it come from? I told myself it had to be a mistake. Someone must have left it here. Maybe a friend, though I couldn't remember the last time I'd had someone over. Still, it was the only explanation that made sense. Until I found the wallet. It was tucked into the inside pocket of the jacket, its leather worn and scuffed. Inside were a handful of bills, a few crumpled receipts, and an ID card. The face staring back at me was unfamiliar. A man in his mid-30s with a thick beard and tired eyes. His name was Mark Tillman. I didn't know a Mark Tillman. For the first time in years, I felt something close to panic. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the items laid out before me like pieces of a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. The jacket, the knife, the wallet, each one a question without an answer. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Mark had borrowed the jacket and forgotten it here. Maybe he'd cut himself on the knife. Maybe I'd loaned him money, and that's why his wallet was empty except for the ID and a couple of dollars. But no matter how many explanations I concocted, none of them fit. None of them explained why I couldn't remember meeting him, or why the bloodstains made my stomach churn with a sick sense of familiarity. That night, the dreams began. They weren't like normal dreams. They didn't fade away the moment I woke up, dissolving into half-remembered fragments. These were vivid, searing images that stayed with me long after I opened my eyes. In one, I was standing in an alley, the knife in my hand. Blood dripped from the blade, pooling around my shoes. In another, I saw Mark's face, his eyes wide with terror as he begged for something I couldn't hear. I woke up drenched in sweat, my pulse racing. The clock read 3:47 a.m. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps outside my door, but when I checked, the hallway was empty. Just my imagination, I told myself. Stress. Nothing more. But the dreams didn't stop. Every night, they grew more detailed, more intense. The alley became a warehouse. The knife became a weapon I wielded with brutal efficiency. Mark's face became clearer, his screams louder. I started to dread falling asleep, but no amount of caffeine could keep the dreams at bay. They were a flood, and I was drowning. By the end of the week, I couldn't ignore the evidence anymore. The jacket, the knife, the wallet. They weren't mistakes. They were pieces of a story I didn't want to tell myself. A story where I wasn't the observer, standing safely behind the bars of the cage. I was the lion. The address was burned into my mind. I had memorized it the moment I pulled the ID from the wallet. I told myself I wasn't going to go, that it was none of my business. But the dreams wouldn't stop, and the jacket still hung in my closet like a specter. Every time I saw it, the bile rose in my throat. I had to know. It was a rundown apartment building on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people went to disappear. The brick facade was chipped and stained, and the front door hung slightly ajar. As I approached, I noticed a cluster of papers taped to the inside of the glass. Among them was a missing person flyer. Mark Tillman. The photograph was the same as the one on the ID, but it was grainy, as though blown up from an older image. The details listed were sparse. Last seen 2 weeks ago. If you have information, contact the authorities. My stomach clenched as I scanned the flyer, my eyes drawn to the date of his disappearance. It was the same night as my first dream. My hands were shaking when I left the building. I didn't know what I'd been hoping to find, a mistake, an explanation, but instead, I'd only found more questions. What had happened to Mark? And why did I feel like I already knew the answer? That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Sarah. We hadn't spoken since college, not since her ambition had carried her into law enforcement while I stayed behind, content with my quiet life. I told myself we had nothing in common anymore, but the truth was I envied her. She had purpose, direction. Now I needed her expertise. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Her voice was clipped, professional, but there was a warmth beneath it I hadn't expected. After the usual pleasantries, I got to the point. Have you heard about the Mark Tillman case? I asked, keeping my tone casual. There was a pause. Yeah, he's one of our missing persons. Why? I just saw his flyer, I said, stumbling over my words. It's strange, isn't it? Disappearing like that. Sarah sighed. Not as strange as you'd think. People go missing all the time. Sometimes they're running from something. Sometimes they don't want to be found. I hesitated. And sometimes she didn't answer right away. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Sometimes it's not their choice. A chill ran down my spine. Do you think that's what happened to Mark? I can't comment on an active case, she said, a note of finality creeping into her tone. But before I could end the call, she added, there's a pattern though. A few other cases like his, men disappearing without a trace. No evidence. No suspects. Her words hung in the air like a thundercloud. A pattern. My dreams weren't just dreams. They were memories, fragments of something I couldn't or wouldn't remember. I thanked her and ended the call, but her voice lingered in my mind, an echo I couldn't shake. The next morning, I noticed the first sign. It was a small thing, a black sedan parked across the street from my apartment. It wasn't unusual for cars to come and go, but this one stayed. Hours passed, and it didn't move. When I left for a walk, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man with sunglasses and a phone pressed to his ear. He didn't look at me, but I felt his gaze anyway. When I returned, the car was gone, but the feeling remained. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but over the next few days, it happened again. Different cars, different drivers, but always the same sense of being watched. I started checking my windows obsessively, peeking through the blinds at odd hours. I stopped taking my usual routes, choosing instead to wander aimlessly, hoping to lose whoever might be following me. It didn't help. The cars always found me. My routine, once a source of comfort, became a prison. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. Even the clock's steady ticking began to grate on my nerves, a constant reminder that time was slipping away. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but in the silence of my apartment, they were deafening. I crept to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The peephole revealed nothing but the dimly lit hallway. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in half. Inside, in blocky, unfamiliar handwriting, was a single word: stop. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the note until the letters blurred. Stop what? Searching? Asking questions? Or was it something else entirely? I thought of the knife, the blood-stained jacket, and the dreams that wouldn't leave me alone. Stop being who I am? I burned the note in the kitchen sink, but the message stayed with me. Whoever was watching me didn't want me to dig any deeper. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close to the truth. The dreams became worse. I saw Mark again, but this time he wasn't alone. There were others, men I didn't recognize, their faces twisted in terror. The scenes blurred together, a cacophony of blood and screams. And always at the center was me, my hands, my knife. I woke up gasping for air, my sheets damp with sweat. The clock read 4:03 a.m., but I knew I wouldn't sleep again. I sat by the window, staring at the empty street below. Somewhere out there, someone knew what was happening to me. Someone had the answers I couldn't find. But as I sat there, watching the shadows shift and stretch, I realized something else. Maybe the answers weren't out there. Maybe they were inside me, buried beneath the cracks in my memory. And maybe I wasn't ready to find them. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the cold. The kind that seeped into your bones and stayed there, unmoving. The ground beneath me was damp, littered with brittle leaves and twigs that dug into my skin. I blinked, trying to make sense of the scene around me. A dense forest, the trees towering like silent sentinels. Morning mist clung to the air, curling around the trunks like smoke. I had no idea where I was. I sat up slowly, wincing as a sharp pain shot through my shoulder. My clothes were damp and clinging to my body. My hands? I froze, staring at them. The dirt beneath my fingernails was dark, almost black, and the palms were scratched and raw. My breath came fast, clouding in the cold air. Then I saw it. A few feet away, the earth was disturbed, freshly turned. The shape was unmistakable, a shallow grave. Panic clawed at my chest as I stumbled to my feet. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to confirm what I already knew. But my body moved on its own, dragging me toward it like a puppet on strings. The edge of the grave was jagged, hastily dug. A hand protruded from the loose soil, pale and stiff, the fingernails caked with mud. My knees buckled and I fell back gasping. I recognized the hand. I recognized the ring on the finger, simple silver with a small black stone. Mark Tillman. I scrambled away, ball rising in my throat. The world tilted, spinning around me like a carnival ride. My hands shook violently as I pressed them against my temples, trying to block out the image burned into my brain. This isn't real. This isn't happening. But it was, and the dirt on my hands told me exactly what I didn't want to admit. I had been the one to bury him. By the time I made it back to my apartment, my legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I locked the door behind me, leaning against it for support. My breath came in shallow gasps, my chest heaving as if I'd run a marathon. The jacket was still hanging in the closet, the knife tucked neatly into its pocket. The wallet sat on the nightstand where I'd left it. I stared at them like they might come alive and attack me. What have I done? The question echoed in my mind, over and over, until it drowned out everything else. I sank onto the bed, my head in my hands. The memories were there, just out of reach, taunting me with their absence. I tried to piece them together, but it was like trying to complete a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Had I killed Mark? Was it possible? The dreams, the blood, the knife. Had they been memories all along? Or was someone manipulating me, planting these fragments to make me doubt myself? I didn't know which was worse, being a monster or being someone so broken that I couldn't tell the difference. The journal was hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk, buried beneath a stack of old papers. I found it while tearing through my apartment, desperate for answers. It was a plain black notebook, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. At first glance, it looked innocuous, until I opened it. The handwriting was mine, looping and precise, but the words felt foreign. Each page was filled with meticulous entries, detailing acts of violence in sickening detail. There were dates, locations, descriptions of the victims. Mark's name was there, along with others I didn't recognize. One entry stood out, dated 2 weeks ago, the night Mark disappeared. He followed the usual pattern. Easy to isolate. Weak. He begged, but they always do. Buried him near the old trail, just past the clearing. No one will find him. They never do. My stomach churned as I read the words. They were written with such cold detachment, as if the author had been cataloging a mundane chore. I flipped through the pages, my horror mounting with each line. It wasn't just a journal. It was a manifesto. The entries described not just the acts themselves, but the reasoning behind them. A twisted philosophy about purging weakness and cleansing the world of mediocrity. There were diagrams and sketches, some depicting gruesome scenes, others outlining methods for disposal. And it was all in my handwriting. I dropped the journal like it was on fire. Stumbling back, my chest tightened, and I felt the walls closing in. This was it. Proof. I wasn't being framed. I wasn't a victim of some elaborate scheme. I was the killer. For hours, I sat on the floor, staring at the journal. My mind swung wildly between denial and acceptance, the two forces waging war inside me. I can't have done this. I would remember. I'm not capable of this. But the evidence said otherwise. The dreams, the jacket, the knife, the dirt on my hands, it all pointed to one conclusion. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that the truth was more complicated than it seemed. I thought of Sarah, her voice on the phone, the way she'd hesitated when I asked about Mark. She knew more than she was letting on, and if she was hiding something, maybe she had answers I couldn't find on my own. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number, my fingers trembling. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaking as I asked her to meet me. I didn't say why. I couldn't. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the window. My face was pale, my eyes sunken. I looked like a ghost, a shell of the man I thought I was. The journal sat on the desk, its pages fluttering in the breeze from the open window. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. It was a part of me now, a mirror reflecting a side of myself I didn't want to see. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the cracks spreading, the pieces of my life fracturing beyond repair. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. But I wasn't sure if I had the strength to face it, because deep down, I already knew. Once I did, there would be no coming back. I didn't hear from Sarah for 3 days. Those 72 hours dragged on endlessly, the clocks ticking a cruel reminder that my life was unraveling by the second. The journal remained on the desk, a damning testament to a version of myself I couldn't reconcile with. My dreams, or memories as I now feared, had grown more vivid, leaving me gasping for air when I woke, drenched in sweat. On the 3rd day, my phone finally rang. Sarah's name lit up the screen. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clipped. "Not over the phone. There's a coffee shop on Main, near the old library. Meet me in an hour." Sarah was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with her back to the wall. Her sharp green eyes scanned the room before locking onto mine. She gestured for me to sit, her expression unreadable. "You've been busy," she said, leaning forward. "Calling me, leaving cryptic messages. What's going on, Ethan?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She didn't wait for an answer. "You've been digging where you shouldn't," she said, "and I need you to stop." Her tone was sharp, but there was something beneath it, an edge of fear. "I found something," I said, my voice low. "Something I can't explain. The dreams, the journal. Sarah, it's like someone rewired my brain. I need to know the truth." She studied me for a moment, then sighed. "I was hoping you wouldn't remember, but I guess it was only a matter of time." "Remember what?" My stomach tightened. She glanced around the cafe, ensuring no one was within earshot. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You were part of a program. Back in the early 2000s. Experimental, highly classified. It was supposed to study the limits of human behavior, but it went sideways." "What kind of program?" I asked, my mouth dry. She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Behavioral conditioning. They wanted to see if they could manufacture violence, take ordinary people and turn them into something different. Soldiers." Operatives. Killers. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. You're saying I was one of their experiments? She nodded. You and a handful of others. They targeted kids, teens mostly. You fit the profile. Isolated, analytical, highly intelligent. Easy to manipulate. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I struggled to process them, to fit them into the broken puzzle of my memories. Why don't I remember? They suppressed it, she said. Conditioned you to forget. But memory suppression isn't perfect. Trauma has a way of leaking through the cracks, especially under stress. I stared at her, my mind racing. And you? How do you know all this? Her jaw tightened. I was assigned to clean up the mess. After the program was disbanded, my team was tasked with tracking down the participants, monitoring them, making sure there were no loose ends. My chest tightened. Monitoring me? Yes, she said, her gaze steady. And for years you were fine, quiet, stable. But now, something's changed. We left the cafe shortly after, Sarah insisting we talk somewhere more private. Back at my apartment, she paced the living room while I sat numbly on the couch, her revelations echoing in my mind. Your dreams, she said, they're not just suppressed memories. They're fragments of the conditioning. The program trained you to dissociate during violent acts, to separate yourself from what you were doing. That's why you can't remember. Your mind compartmentalized it. I shook my head, my hands gripping my knees. If the program was shut down, why is this happening now? Why the journal, the dreams, the murders? She stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. That's the question, isn't it? Maybe it's the conditioning breaking down. Or maybe it's you. Her words felt like a slap. What are you saying? I'm saying, she said, her voice hard, that the program didn't create killers. It just unlocked what was already there. The room spun, her accusation cutting deeper than I thought possible. You think this is my fault? I don't know, Ethan, she said, her voice softening. I've seen what the conditioning does, but I've also seen people resist it, fight it. You're the only one who can answer that. That night, after Sarah left, I couldn't sleep. Her words haunted me, replaying over and over in my mind. Was this who I was? A monster, hiding behind a mask of normalcy? Or was I still a victim, a pawn in someone else's game? The answers came in the form of a discovery. While searching my apartment, desperate for anything that might prove my innocence, I found a second journal tucked behind a refrigerator. This one was different, sloppier, more chaotic. The entries were frantic, scrawled in handwriting that barely resembled mine. The first page sent chills down my spine. Ethan doesn't remember yet, but he will. He's starting to crack. Good. He needs to crack. The truth has to come out. The murders were necessary, but they weren't his. They were mine. I flipped through the pages, each one worse than the last. The entries detailed not just the killings, but the deliberate planning behind them. Each step had been orchestrated to push me further, to make me doubt myself. One entry stood out. Sarah needs a win. She's desperate. If Ethan falls, she rises. She'll pin it all on him, just like we planned. My blood ran cold. Sarah, she hadn't been monitoring me. She'd been manipulating me. The confrontation came the next day. I called Sarah, telling her I had more questions, that I needed her help. She came willingly, her demeanor calm. But when I showed her the journal, her mask slipped. You weren't supposed to find that, she said, her voice low. It's true, isn't it? I said, my hands trembling. You staged the murders. Frame me. Why? She didn't answer at first, her expression hardening. Then, finally, she said, because you're expendable, Ethan. The program failed, but the damage it caused didn't go away. People wanted answers, justice. I gave it to them. You ruined my life, I whispered, rage boiling in my chest. I did what I had to, she said, her voice ice cold. You were already broken. I just used that. The words hung between us, heavy and damning. For the first time in my life, I felt something snap, a tether breaking, a dam bursting. And as I looked at Sarah, I realized the truth. I wasn't the puppet. She was. And I wasn't going to let her pull the strings anymore. I knew Sarah would take the bait. She'd spent weeks trying to pull me into her web, and now I had the perfect lure, my surrender. When I called her, my voice was steady, but the lie behind it felt like a blade pressed to my throat. You were right, I said, pacing the small apartment. I can't fight this. The program, it's inside me. I need your help to make it right. There was a long pause before she answered. When she did, her voice was soft, almost pitying. I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly, Ethan. Meet me tonight. Let's put this behind us. She gave me an address, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was perfect, isolated, quiet, a place where I could force the truth out of her without interruption. I ended the call, gripping the phone so tightly it hurt. This ends tonight. The warehouse was everything I expected. Rusted steel beams, broken windows, the faint stench of decay. I arrived first, positioning a small recording device in a corner where it would pick up every word. The journal sat on a crate nearby, open to the most damning entries. All I had to do was get her to talk. Sarah arrived minutes later, her footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. She was dressed in black, her movements purposeful, like a predator stalking its prey. Ethan, she said, her tone calm. I'm glad you're here. I forced a weak smile, playing the part of the broken man. I need to understand, Sarah. Why me? Why do I feel like I'm losing control? She stepped closer, her eyes sharp with calculation. Because you were always the perfect candidate. Smart, isolated, desperate for meaning. The program didn't just create killers, Ethan. It created tools. And you were one of the best. Her words twisted in my gut like a knife. But why frame me? Why push me this far? She sighed, as if the answer was obvious. Because you're expendable. People like you always are. The program's legacy needed to be buried, and I needed a way to close the books on these cases. You were the perfect scapegoat. I felt my hands clench into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. And the murders? Were they yours too? Her lips curved into a faint smile. Some, not all, but the ones that mattered? Yes. And you made it so easy, Ethan. The journal, the dreams, the evidence. I just needed to give you a little push. I stepped back, my chest heaving. You used me. I saved you, she said, her voice hard. Without me, you'd still be living your empty little life, pretending to be normal. Now you know the truth. Isn't that better? I shook my head, my vision blurring. Better? I don't even know who I am anymore. You're exactly who you were meant to be, she said, stepping closer. And deep down, you know it. The recorder captured every word. I had her confession, proof of her manipulation. All I had to do was walk away, hand it over to the authorities, and let justice take its course. But as I reached for the recorder, something shifted inside me. My head throbbed, a searing pain that stole my breath. The room seemed to tilt, and for a moment, I saw a double. Two Sarahs, two warehouses, two versions of reality colliding. She must have seen the change in my expression because she smiled. You're feeling it, aren't you? The conditioning. It's still there, Ethan. It never left. No, I whispered, clutching my head. You're lying. Am I? She said, circling me like a vulture. Think about it. The memory gaps, the rage, the way your mind keeps splintering. That's the program, Ethan. It's who you are. I stumbled back, the journal slipping from my grasp. You did this to me. I just turned the key, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. You're the one who opened the door. Her words were a hammer, shattering the fragile wall I'd built around myself. Images flooded my mind, blood, screams, the glint of a knife in my hand. They weren't dreams. They were memories, pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. No, I said again, but it was weaker this time, the denial slipping through my fingers. Yes, she hissed, stepping closer. You've always been a monster, Ethan. I just showed you the truth. The rage hit me like a tidal wave. It wasn't rational, wasn't controlled. It was raw, primal, an animalistic fury that consumed every thought. Before I knew what I was doing, my hands were around her throat. She struggled, clawing at my arms, but I didn't stop. Her words echoed in my mind, fueling the fire. Monster, scapegoat, tool. The labels didn't matter anymore. Nothing did. When she went still, I let her body fall to the floor. My chest heaved, my vision swimming. The warehouse was silent, save for the sound of my ragged breathing. I looked down at her, my hands trembling. Blood seeped from a cut on her temple, pooling on the concrete. The realization hit me like a freight train. I had done exactly what she wanted. I had proven her right. The sirens started faintly, growing louder with each passing second. Someone must have heard the struggle, called the cops. Or maybe they'd been watching all along. It didn't matter. I didn't run. I stood over her body, staring at the wreckage of what I'd become. My reflection in the blood-stained floor was unrecognizable, a shadow of the man I thought I was. The man I'd tried so hard to be. The sirens wailed, the lights flashing against the warehouse walls. I didn't resist when they cuffed me, didn't speak when they asked what had happened. There was nothing left to say, because Sarah was right. The monster wasn't hiding anymore. The monster was me. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.